Landlords TV, a production of Landlords New York. This is Ellen Tea Time with Michelle, the show where you get to have a cup of tea with me, Michelle Morato-Itkowitz, and we talk about an area that I've been practicing law in New York City for over 20 years, and that is real estate. And today I am honored to have Landlords New York member Aida Gashi, who is a property manager at REM Residential.
Michelle, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Thank you for being here. So I deal with a lot of people who say they quote unquote grew up in real estate, but you literally really grew up in real estate because your father was a resident manager of a luxury condo on the Upper East Side?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So from your earliest days, you remember him on site just dealing with all kinds of property management problems.
Yeah, we grew up, I moved in to that building when I was 7 years old as they were still building it. So he was resident manager and he was superintendent and he was construction manager and all that. And from the age of 7, you know, I saw what he was going through. I've seen my father go through, you know, because it was a luxury condo, you had the shareholders and board meetings and dealing with different owners, dealing with contractors, dealing with his property manager. Now, I'm a property manager.
Did you think that was going to happen, by the way? Did you say, oh, I'm going to grow up and be a property manager?
Never. I studied political science and English in school. Those two have definitely helped me in real estate, but I never imagined that I'd be working in real estate.
And before REM, I think this is very interesting, you were at the Department of Housing Preservation and Development, HPD.
Yes.
I don't know if I've ever met anybody who...
Well, I wasn't... People usually think of HPD and city agencies as like, you know, their bane of their existence. I worked as a research assistant. So what we did is we studied the effects of affordable housing on families. So it was a little bit different. I wasn't one of those clerks behind the counter.
No, I understand perfectly. So,
but I learned a lot. That also helped me a great deal now in my transition to property management.
So I read a very interesting blog post that you wrote. Really excellent. You were talking about you and your friends, other property managers, having a drink, and it got to be this whole conversation, those who manage co-ops versus those who manage rent-stabilized units, and who has it harder. One set has board meetings, one set has paperwork. Very interesting. Where do you come down on that?
That was that was an article. Every month I write for the Man Report, a real estate publication, and that month I decided to do an article on the pros and cons of co-op and condo management versus rental. I do rental, and a lot of my friends in the industry and, you know, just personal friends, they do co-op and condos, and they always complain about, oh, board meetings, and it took us so long, Michelle, just to even get a date where all of us could get together, because most of them have board meetings
at
in the
night.
evening. Exactly.
Right.
Whereas, and now granted, property management, even if you're doing rentals, is not a 9-to-5 job. You're married to your phone, you're always on call no matter what. But it was a really, really interesting, the article is interesting, and the discussion was interesting. They were saying, oh, we have to listen to our shareholders talk about their dogs and summer camp and so on and so forth. And I'm like, okay, but I have to listen to Miss, so-and-so complain about her leaky faucet, or, the superintendent didn't, come on demand, or they're two different animals, but essentially it's the same thing. You have to have people skills. You have your landlords who are your clients for a property manager that does rentals, but if you're doing the co-ops and condos, your clients are
They're kind
the
of your
owners.
clients too.
Right.
Actually, that was another interesting conversation we had off camera that I'd like to ask you about. You were talking about the phenomena of the first time homeowner shareholder, someone who's just bought their first co-op, and what they're like to deal with, how there's sort of a hybrid between shareholder and tenant.
We manage a condo in Green Avenue in Brooklyn, and it's an up-and-coming neighborhood,
Right.
great area. And a lot of the a lot of the owners there are first-time owners. They probably, just got married, they were renting in Williamsburg up until now,
Right.
and now that transition from a renter where, you pick up the phone and you call to complain to the superintendent or, the property manager, to it's my responsibility. Like, I have to pay if a kitchen tile breaks, for example. So a lot of them, they're not too familiar with the, they have to read that offering guide very carefully, but we're always there to help them.
I see that in my practice a lot, because sometimes people don't understand, the shareholder has the skin to skin the wall, within the walls, but then if you go a little bit into the pipe, then it's really the building. So how much is education unofficially or officially part of your job as a property manager?
It's a big part. It's a big part. At REM, one of the big things that our boss, Rick Elisi, emphasizes is education. Every single week we go to NIRM seminars, we go to RSA seminars, CHIP. He provides, education for us if we want to register after work for, any continuing education courses in real estate property management.
That's excellent.
Yeah, it's really, really good. And it comes in handy because it also gives you the upper edge. If a tenant or even an owner, meaning a co-op or condo shareholder, is disputing something, if you know your facts and if you know what you're talking about, and of course the way you say it too, it can give you a great deal of leverage.
Very interesting. Here's a question for you. What's it like being a woman in a male-dominated field? Most property managers, I think, if we looked at it statistically, are men.
Now that's interesting because, like I said, every month I write for the Man Report, and there's always, the hardest part for me isn't the actual writing, it's coming up with a topic to discuss, to write about that hasn't been discussed yet. And we did a brainstorming session at work a few months ago about one of the articles, and then a lot of the girls, because in my company where I work, we're mostly female.
Interesting.
Yes, we're mostly female. And one of the girls said, oh, why don't we do an article on women in property management? And then my boss, Rick, and his wife, Shpressa, they were like, no, that makes no sense.
I didn't plan that question. I just want the audience to know that. That was your curveball question. Very interesting.
They were like, no, that doesn't make any sense. And we're like, why not? Because I thought, too, it was a male-dominated industry. But in fact, it's not. Really? Yeah, I was surprised. Many
But when you go to RSA, CHIP, all these things, when you attend a function, it's a lot of
it is
men.
Yeah. And that's what I thought.
But so property management, you're saying, has an equal number of women?
Yes.
Very interesting.
And my boss's wife, Shpressa, she has a very interesting take on it. Although it may be politically incorrect, it's still very interesting. She thinks that women make better property managers.
I don't think it's... I think that makes a lot of sense.
And I asked her, why is that? And she said, because women are always looking. She goes, look at a marriage. She goes, you're a property manager, you're married to your landlord, to your client, right? I said, okay. She goes, a husband and wife are married. She goes, the wife is the one that looks to use coupons, looks to cut bills. She looks for things on sale. The man doesn't care. She goes, female property managers are always looking for the cheapest way, the easiest way, the smoothest way to do things, whereas men have maybe
the smoothest way, the path of least resistance is sometimes the best and most efficient and cheapest and best for the client. This is a great conversation, and we could go all day. Can you hang out for 2 seconds while we do the teaching portion?
I'd love to.
All right, so on to the teaching portion. We'll be right back. Okay, so today we're talking about rent impairing violations. So we all know that the Department of Housing Preservation and Development, HPD, issues violations against a building if it comes and it finds things wrong. Those violations are categorized. So they have numbers, and the number means a certain type of violation. For instance, a 507 is repair the roof so that it no longer leaks. So each violation gets a category number. Now, pursuant to Multiple Dwelling Law 302A, HPD is allowed to designate certain of those categories as rent impairing violations. So what's the significance of this? The significance is that if a violation that is rent impairing is of record and properly served to the owner on record at that time with HPD, 6 months later, if that violation is still there, then the landlord is not allowed to recover rent from the tenant. So now let's take a minute here. I just said rent impairing violation, more than 6 months of record, landlord can't recover rent from the tenant. Now I want to clarify, if the tenant, that doesn't mean the tenant doesn't owe the rent. If the tenant is paying the rent, the landlord can take it. The tenant can't sue the landlord to get the rent back. But what the landlord can't do is they can't recover the rent. They can't sue the tenant for the rent. And this is the statute's way of making sure that people correct their rent impairing violations. So, it's a pretty serious situation, and it can be even a little bit more serious in the sense that the statute says that a violation that's in a common area of the building is against every apartment. So if you have a rent impairing violation for more than 6 months in a common area, it's theoretically possible that the whole building could say, hey, you know, we're not going to pay the rent. But let's walk it back a little. There are a few exceptions and things you should know. For one thing, in order to raise this defense, the statute also says, this isn't just like any other defense in housing court. In order to raise the rent impairing violation defense, a tenant is required to deposit the whole amount of rent that they are being sued for with the clerk of the civil court. So it's kind of like a cushion built in. Also, a tenant can't raise the 302A rent impairing violation defense if they've caused the violation or if they're not allowing the landlord to come in to fix the violation. So how do you know if you have a rent impairing violation? You look on HPD and you see what your violations are, and the list of rent impairing violations, because it's updated periodically, you should check it. You're going to go on newyorkcity.gov and then to the rules of the city of New York, or you can just really Google list of rent impairing violations and you're going to get it. And then compare your violations numbers to those violations and see if they've been there for 6 months or more. Where I see this come up is a building that hasn't been purchased recently and also hasn't been refinanced recently, or maybe there hasn't been any program or subsidy that the landlord has submitted themselves to where violations matter. So the point is, if you haven't checked your violations in a while, if you've had a tenant who's been calling 311 and maybe HPD's been in there, check your violations. Everybody wants a violation-free building, but in particular, you want those rent impairing violations. You don't want them to hang around.
Michelle, that was really interesting, the point that you made about the rent impairing violations, because I deal with professional tenants all the time. So that was definitely informative.
Thank you very much. And you know what? This has been a great show. Do you think you could maybe come back in the future at some point and give us some more tips?
I thought you'd never ask. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so you're watching Landlords TV, a production of Landlords New York, and you've been watching L&T Time with Michelle.